But welcome to everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Kent Nelson. I'm a forest ranger with the Maine Forest Service. I've been working with the Sprucewold community for about 10 or 11 years now. And I'm going to kind of have a short overview of the Firewise program. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Firewise program in Sprucewold. I think most of you know all the accomplishments that they've had in the last 9 or 10 years, but I think it's good to go over those on occasion so those who may be new to the program understand how much effort has gone into it. So we'll do that, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the brush chipping went this year, and then I have some slides that kind of show a little bit of education on how we can reduce that risk of wildfire near our homes. Kind of going to go over some pictures and show some places that could use improvement that pictures I've taken over the years. Nothing that urgent. And then we'll talk a little bit about how the fire season has been here in Maine in general, and we hope to finish this up within about 30 minutes. I know you folks have other things to do today. But thank you so much for joining us and for your patience with my limited knowledge of these video systems. The state does request that I use this Microsoft Teams, so it's a little bit different than Zoom, but each time I get a little bit better at it. But Ralph has been very patient with my setting this thing up, and I had some things come up last week I had to take care of at work, but here we are. So welcome. And is Jim Powers on the line? Did the phone work? I don't hear anything. Okay, well, hopefully that worked. I was told that was going to work. Maybe he'll keep trying on that. So anyway, I'm going to start off with a short overview of the Firewise program. One of the requirements that we need to adhere to is to maintain a Firewise board. And that is somewhat informal, but it's generally, Ralph Kimball, Chief Upham, and Jim Powers and I kind of try to keep the ship steering straight here. And another requirement to stay in the Firewise program is to do an annual brush chipping day, which I think you're familiar with. And the last thing is we need to do a Firewise Day, which is a wildfire prevention and education event, and that's what this meeting is all about. And I'll just go over how that's calculated, because each site is required to invest the equivalent of 1 volunteer hour per dwelling in wildfire risk reduction actions per year. So if there was 100 homes in Sprucewold, then they would be required to do 100 volunteer hours of wildfire risk reduction. So that the wildfire risk reduction includes a brush chipping day and a Firewise Day event and all the planning and everything that goes along with that. You guys have had no problem in meeting these goals in the past, and there is a little bit of money that's tied to it, but it's not really money. It's volunteer work, because they found that the national rate for volunteer work is $25 an hour. So you get you crunch all the numbers and you see that you guys have exceeded the amount of work that needs to be done. But there will never be a chance for them to ask for money to stay in the program. It's all volunteer work. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I'll pause just for a second if there's any questions on that, because that was a lot of information at once.
Ken,
okay. Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
How many Firewise communities does the Maine Forest Service work with in Maine?
We have 8. And they're mostly in the southern third of the state, and most of them are along the coast. No surprise. So, but we currently don't have any plans to expand. So we're glad you guys got in when you did, and we'll try to keep it going as long as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And you did see that I changed the slide, right? Things are moving.
No.
Did you have a picture of a Firewise sign?
No, it didn't move.
Oh, man. Maybe I got to move it over here. Okay. Did
There
that
you
move?
go. Yep.
Okay. I don't know why this is doing that, but anyway, I can deal with it if you guys can. All right, so the second slide shows a picture of a Firewise sign and talks about generally what the program's about.
Yeah, Kent, we're back to
Back to the fire
the
and the flag.
Oh, man. Okay, I can move that back. I did make a change here.
There you go.
All right, I will. It just means I got to turn my head a little bit, but okay, we're going to talk about the history of the Firewise program at Sprucewold, and you should be seeing a kind of a Google Earth air photo with some little icons where the samples were taken back in 2010. You see that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right. So in the fall of 2010, the Forest Service worked with Bar Harbor Fire Department, no, I'm sorry, Boothbay Harbor, to complete about 30 wildfire risk assessments throughout Sprucewold. And those were mostly randomly selected, but we had a few people that requested their homes be done. And Sue Mello wrote a short article on the wildfire risk assessments in the Boothbay Register, which was good. And that's the first time we did brush chipping, was back in 2010. And then in 2011, the National Fire Protection Association and the Maine Forest Service recognized Sprucewold as its third Firewise community. And I want to let you know that they changed the verbiage. We used to call them Firewise communities, and now they're Firewise USA sites. But I'm not going to get too worried about that if somebody says that wrong. It's still Firewise. But NFPA decided to change that a couple years ago. And here was an article that was done in the Boothbay Register that shows the community getting the award there. And also about that time, I think Kurt worked on with the fire chief on a Sprucewold evacuation plan, which was very good. And that was the first one of our Firewise communities to do that. So that's important if we ever get a fire. And moving on to July 2013, the fire department did a training exercise. They set up about 3,000 feet of fire hose from the hydrant on Crest Ave. And it took, they wanted to see how long it would take for the water to get to the end. It took about 6 or 7 minutes. And they also said that for an actual fire, water would also be shuttled in with trucks. So they've had some training up there. And we also, in 2013, we brought in our wildfire simulator, which is kind of a sand table that has a projector that projects the community on it. And this wasn't the actual picture of that Firewise Day. This is another setting where we had some training with a different ranger. But that was really good because it has a fire simulation software in there, so we could start an imaginary fire in one section of Sprucewold and set the wind speed and direction and see how it would burn and how much time it would take to get through a certain area. And it's a good training tool that we still have, but we're trying to get an updated version of it. But that was a good training, and I think that was the last time I was in the lodge, if I recall. I think that's the lodge has been through some ownership changes since then, but that was 2013. And then in 2014, Sprucewold got a $900 Safer Places Award from the National Fire Protection Association. And this was based on all the hazardous fuels mitigations activities that they'd done in the past. And they were given kind of a broad scope of what they could do with the money. And they decided they would use it for removing brush and wood debris from this triangle area between Crest and Nahanada. You'll have to pronounce that for me. But this, I went through some old pictures and I thought this was interesting. This is kind of a before, and if you look on the left-hand side by where the trailer is, there's lots of that brush and old spruce trees that had fallen down. And then this is what it looked like afterwards. So they really did a lot of removal work in there. And if I had known about this, I would have taken a picture from the same angle when we were there doing the chipping. But I assume it still looks pretty good there. You guys want to take a minute to discuss that project?
Yeah, just so you're located, Pat Moore, that's where your driveway branches off from Crest. And it really was a jumble. And Ernie LaBelle, in fact, I think that's Ernie's truck in the background on that one, took over the project. And to do a major part of it, that we did hire he did hire an outside firm to come in and do it because it was an onerous task. And today it looks great. And Ernie continued on with clearing out the brush a little bit so we could see around the corner of Crest as it goes down the hill by the lodge. So that's pretty well been cleaned up.
Well, good. And just so you know, I mean, there was only, I think, 2 Firewise communities in the nation that got those awards, and you guys were the runners up. So it just goes to say how much effort has been put into trying to reduce the risk of wildfire in this community. And my hat's off to those that have been involved over the years. And I know it's been kind of rotating, but you guys are doing a great job, and I hope it continues.
Hi, this is Pat Moore. This is on topic, but sort of, maybe not the time to say it, but there are 2 really dead trees up there now that I don't know whose property it is. I know it's not ours, but if there's anybody who could take out those dead trees, they're very obvious.
Okay.
And I'll take a look at it with you and just see what's up there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right. So moving along on the history of Firewise in Sprucewold. Let's see. We did a Firewise Day in 2015 down by the beach parking lot and held up a banner there and talked to a few folks. And then in the last couple of years, we haven't really had a Firewise Day event as much as I've been doing 6 or 7 wildfire risk assessments by appointment. And Ralph's helped to set those up. I think the first year I said I would do 10 or 11, and I found that was a pretty long day. Not that I mind doing that stuff, but I cut it down to 6 or 7 because a lot of people that they want to talk about things, and I can get talking too when I'm doing these. So we're probably going to continue with that in the future because the NFPA, who administers Firewise, they want to make sure that we're continually checking on progress of the brush and the wood debris near the structures. We probably won't do any this year because we're doing this Firewise Day, but in the future we'll get back to that. So let's talk a little bit about chipping. That's kind of evolved over the years. This picture was taken in 2010. And I think we did 2 or 3 truckloads of brush using volunteers from the community as well as the Boothbay Harbor Fire Department. And fortunately now we've been able to get federal grants, and we hire 3 college students to load the brush. So that's helped a lot with the need for volunteers. And it lets you guys focus more on clearing the brush and putting it curbside, as we say. So I don't know if people remember those days. And that was our old chipper, a big diesel chipper that was, well, they're all loud, but that thing's still with us. But we got a new chipper 2 years ago, and that's what we use this year. Oh, that's still 2014. But then this year, we used our new chipper, which runs on regular gas. It's a little quieter. And then there's our 3 college interns helping to load some of the brush that you guys gathered, which I think is a good deal. They get pretty efficient at loading the brush after doing it. We do about 10 or 12 of these a season. It's not all we do by any means, but they get pretty efficient at it, and we can get through there and get in and out without disrupting the traffic. And this year we didn't mess up the mailman like we usually do. He's always trying to deliver and pick up mail right at the same time we're at the mailboxes, it seems. But this year, despite the reduction in seasonal residents due to COVID-19, we chipped about 1 3/4 truckloads. So it was a little bit less than what we started with back in 2010, but that still is fine for staying in the program and for helping to reduce the risk of wildfire.
Yeah, Kent, just make a quick comment. Considering that we had 14 participants this year versus what we normally get is 23 or 25, there was a significant effort on the part of the 14 because we chipped almost as much as we did in a regular season. So I want to thank all the participants very much. Okay.
That's a good point. Thanks for chiming in on that. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the current fire activity here in Maine. Oops, let's go to that one. So far this year, we've had almost 900 wildland fires, which have burned 966 acres, which is the second highest total in the past decade. So we've had a busy fire year. And out of all those wildfires that we investigate, we assign a cause and we check off a box whether it destroyed, damaged, or threatened structures. And in the past, we've tallied that up, and it's about 3/4 of these fires either destroyed, damaged, or threatened structures. So we have a lot of small fires in Maine, but most of them are near structures, camps, outbuildings, houses, stuff like that. So this is something that we need to be aware of, all of us, not just the Maine Forest Service, but the local fire department, and as well as the association you're in and the community. So you realize that, you know, we don't have these devastating million-acre fires like there are out in California right now, at least not since 1947. But we still have a lot of fires here, and they can do a lot of damage in a quick amount of time. So this program is to help you deal with that and try to prevent the loss of structures and property values and lives due to fires. So now,
Kent, were any of those fires in a Firewise community in Maine?
No, and it's kind of weird because you certainly never wish that a fire is in a Firewise community, but if we did have one, I think it would not spread as easily because of the reduction in brush. And we did, our first Firewise community kind of dropped out a couple of years ago. It was down in Waterboro. And they did have a fire in an area that we had chipped some brush, and we do think that it did reduce the spread of that fire. And like most of our fires, it was during the springtime that we had the fires within the communities. Things are dry. Right after the snow has melted in April, we have a lot of dead, dry, fine fuels, the small stuff that's smaller than the size of a pencil. And that burns really easily during the windy days of March and April when we have low relative humidity. So, like I said, we investigate all the fires in Maine and put a cause to each one of those. And this is the 3 top causes for wildfires in Maine so far. And this is pretty typical in the last 10 years. Debris burns are the #1 cause. So that's defined as someone who has good intentions. They've got some tree limbs down after a storm came through and they want to clean up their yard, so they're going to burn that brush, get rid of it, but then they don't take care of it right. They leave the fire going and run off to do errands, and it spreads while they're gone, or they go to bed and it's still going and the wind kicks up at night. So that is typically the number one cause of fires. And the second one is equipment caused fires. And I've got a picture of a timber harvesting machine there that caught on fire. And that probably isn't going to happen too close to Sprucewold. But I did want to mention that equipment caused fire could also be caused by a lawnmower or a brush cutter or a generator, something that's machinery that's running outside near the forest. So when things are dry and the winds are howling, all it would take is a brush cutter hitting a rock by accident, setting a spark off, and a fire could start. So those are very dangerous too. And no surprise here, but the third cause is unattended campfires. And those are both campfires near houses that people have in their backyards that they don't put out, or they get too big and they get out of control. And it also includes fires along the Appalachian Trail and at campgrounds and hiking areas, camping areas. So that's a pretty broad category. But if you can see that picture there, they've got a beautiful stone fire pit with a metal grate on it, and yet they left the fire going and it escaped. The wind pushed it outside of those rocks and it burned 20 or 30 feet beyond that. So fire pits, they do help reduce the spread of fire, but they're not fireproof when the conditions are right. Now, every week we've been getting a updated drought map, and I wasn't able to get this week's in the slide yet. I think it comes out tomorrow, but this was a couple weeks ago, and you can see that your area of the mid-coast Sprucewold there would be in a severe drought area. And I worked Saturday and part of Sunday, and I know we got a lot of rain in the mountain area, central highlands of Maine. But did you guys get much rain there on Saturday?
Yes.
Okay, so this probably is a little bit outdated, but I think everyone's aware of the concerns about drought, seasonal drought. So here are some other concerns for Sprucewold, and these haven't really changed over the years. We're still concerned about the type of vegetation that's near structures. We used to call that area defensible space within 30 feet of a structure. Is there any combustible materials there, especially softwood, which has a lot of resins in the bark? So we want to keep, no pun intended, but chipping away at that. And you certainly don't have to cut all your trees and all your brush. That's not why you bought property and live in Sprucewold. The trees are beautiful, but we want to encourage people to keep taking a little bit of that brush away from the structures when they can. And we call that fuel loading. The wood is combustible. It's called a fuel to the firefighter. So you also want to work on that in the commonly owned properties, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Another concern is quite obvious: the response time and access to get to properties in Sprucewold. And the fire department has a large area to cover, and they do mutual aid with the surrounding towns. But for them to get on that peninsula that you live on, it's a bit of a challenge. I'm sure they're going to do great if needed, but it's hard to widen the roads and make them more accessible. I don't know if that's going to happen. I hear there's a lot of ledge on that peninsula that is also making it difficult to get the municipal water. And that was my last topic there on the slide, the lack of fresh water sources. Salt water is not very good for firefighting equipment. Not only is it unreliable to draft from, it'd have to be high tide, and you'd have to have it pretty close to the, you can't draft up 30, 40 feet very easily, but it's also very hard on the equipment. So I'm assuming that anything that we or the Boothbay Harbor Fire Department does is going to be with fresh water. Any comments on that?
That's about that's correct, Kent. And we have tried to get the water department interested in putting a couple of hydrants further into Sprucewold. That's a high priority on Chief Upham's plate. But we've frankly been told by the water department, unless you guys can come up with $600,000 or $700,000, the total cost for putting 2 hydrants plus the pumping station in Sprucewold is about $1.4 million.
Oh,
And right now, that's out of our reach. And at one point, we were on their capital equipment list for things to do in the future. And the last time I talked to John, that had been removed. I did talk with Paul Colomb, not to, the first question out of his mouth was, well, how much money do you want? And I said, we don't want any, Paul. What I wanted to do was hopefully he would use his influence to, because of all the development that he's doing on Atlantic Avenue, it's going to require him to work with the water department and make them fully cognizant of the danger, the fire danger to the east side of Boothbay Harbor if a wildfire gets going in Sprucewold. And he and I had a pleasant conversation. I sent him a follow-up email documenting what we had talked about, and plus I gave him a Rusticator's book, and so far that hasn't paid any dividends. So.
well, thank you for the update, and I know it's a very difficult situation there, but you know, I'm trained to kind of look at the worst case scenarios, and I often talk about that when I do these wildfire risk assessments. And the worst case scenario is a seasonal drought in the area and a fire in the middle of the peninsula, and panicked people trying to leave, driving out the same way that the fire apparatus is trying to come in. You know, that's a worst case scenario. You can't see in the smoke. People are trying to get out in a panic, and they're trying to get in to put stuff out. So these are things we have to keep in mind. And, you know, maybe at some point the roads could be widened a little bit, or some turnouts could be installed. But I know that's a difficult thing and costly too. So just, I guess we'll keep that on the back burner for now. I'm going to go over some training that I got with NFPA on what used to be called the defensible space, but now they're calling it home ignition zones. And this won't take very long, but if you can see that graphic, it's got 3 different squares around a home. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them to help you guys understand, you know, kind of how to be smart about how you remove your brush. I think most of us have more of an eye for landscaping rather than fire prevention. And some of the things go hand in hand, but in other cases, a lot of people don't realize how likely it is for the smaller stuff to burn than the larger stuff. And when I say small, I mean less than the size of your wrist. So if you look at this diagram, the house, there's the immediate zone is between 0 to 5 feet of the house. And that's where embers and surface fires could land right near the foundation, burn some leaves, and then ignite the house. They've done studies on this, and some of those big fires in California, it's not a wall of flame that goes through these communities and burns every house. It's every other house, and it depends where the embers land and what they land in. So if you have a worst case scenario like that, and you've got a structure fire putting up a lot of flames and embers and heat, you want to make sure that you've spent time on that immediate zone within 0 to 5 feet, and you've raked up and vacuumed up and swept up any leaves and needles that are right near the house. And then the next area is the square is in orange, and it's called the intermediate zone, and that's between 5 and 30 feet. And that's where you're going to spend some of your time making sure that there's no contiguous, lines of brush and forest and softwoods coming from the forest to the house. So you want to break up that line. You can still keep a couple of the trees, but make them in little islands, little pockets of vegetation rather than a continuous line. So that's what we used to call defensible space. And then the last one is the extended zone, and that's 30 to 100 feet. And you're going to still do some stuff there for fire prevention, but not as much. And some of you folks don't have 100 feet in your yards anyway, but it kind of gives you the idea where the emphasis now is more on the immediate zone. And again, that comes from a lot of research and investigating how fires have swept through communities like yours. So I've got a couple slides, and some of these were taken in Sprucewold years ago, and others were from other similar communities. So just my little disclaimer, I don't want to embarrass anybody by what I found with these pictures, but it's just to share, and so we can learn from it. So here's some examples of vegetation within the immediate zone, 0 to 5 feet. The slide in the right, you can see that there's a softwood that's right next to some cedar shingle siding, and if a surface fire were to ignite that softwood tree, it would torch and would probably ignite the side of that house. Whereas on the left-hand side, you've got that same type of siding, but you've got it protected by some, a foot or two of gravel, which obviously isn't going to burn. And that might not have been done for fire prevention, but it certainly works well and much better than putting mulch down or wood chips. So that's an example there. This picture was taken in Camden a couple years ago, and we staged this. We set up cameras, and we had the fire department there. They were going to burn the house down anyway for a training exercise. So we got some straw, and we lit it on fire and made a path going to the shrub just to see what would happen. And once that shrub got going, it torched up. You can see that's 10 or 15 feet high, and it did catch the side of that house on fire. So it doesn't take long, given the right conditions, for that to happen. And here, this slide shows a couple of pictures of wood and leaf litter near structures. The house on the left has a kind of raised deck area with a lot of leaves and needles and shrubs and debris underneath it, where if there was a leaf fire in the fall, where it's dry and the leaves burn, it would burn uphill, and it would probably catch that deck on fire, which would catch the house on fire. Now on the right-hand slide, there's a couple of chairs and a table, and there's just a few leaves sitting around in a kind of gravel area, and that's fine. Those leaves there are not going to make a big fire, and then so that's an example of good fire prevention practice. This one here shows a house on the right, and there's some softwood trees below it. I believe this house looks over the ocean, and they have cleared some brush either to make a fire break or for a view, and they've left it there. And the point of this is that it's downslope. So if that brush were to ignite somehow, there was a structure below them. If that structure caught fire and that fire crept uphill, fire tends to preheat as it goes uphill, and it moves faster. So that house would be very likely to burn if there was a fire down the hill below it. So what they could do is they could clear that brush out and put some well-watered grass in, or a stone patio, something like that. So there are things you can do. I've talked about these ladder fuels with most of you when I've done these wildfire risk assessments in the past, and it's just a concept that the surface fire may only be a foot or two high, and it might burn along the ground, and then once it gets to a softwood tree with low hanging branches, it catches that whole tree on fire and it torches, and it could lead to crown fires. So you can prevent some of this by just simply pruning the trees 4 to 6 feet high off the ground, and you can even do that within the shoreland zone, but you can't cut trees down within the shoreland zone just because they're a fire hazard. You have to check with the code enforcement officer on that. So we also, when we do these wildfire risk assessments, we look at building materials and leaf litter. And the photo on the right, it's got two different roof angles coming together, and in between them, there's a lot of leaves that have built up. And again, if you have embers flying in the air from a nearby structure fire or a good-sized wildfire, if the embers land there in that leaves, it will ignite the leaves. It might not burn through the shingles, but those embers and the firebrands will kind of roll off that roof, and they're going to land right on the ground in some shrubs or some leaves, and that could ignite your house. So certainly try to get those taken care of for those seasonal folks. Get that taken care of before you leave the area, because springtime is when we have most of our wildfires, and you don't want those leaves on there in the spring especially. I also list possible ignition sources, and the picture on the left was a barbecue grill or charcoal grill that was near a lot of vegetation and not too far away from the corner of one of the structures. You could see that the ashes have been dumped right there in the bottom center of the picture. So maybe that was done when there was snow in the ground. I don't know, but that's a pretty dangerous procedure. And then the picture on the right is a reminder to make sure you properly dispose of all ashes, even if it's from a wood stove. Make sure it goes into a metal can and sits for a number of days before it gets discarded. And I've talked about this today. This was another training burn that we did a couple of years ago up near Skowhegan. But structures, we consider them fuel. So to me, that is, if there is going to be a big fire in Sprucewold, I think it's going to start as a structure fire and spread that way. But you never know, and we hope that never happens. But just keep that in mind when you look at the brush around your house and around your neighbor's house. I've talked a little bit about this too. It's we want you to kind of concentrate on the smaller vegetation that's more likely to carry a surface fire, because we investigate all the wildfires in Maine, and we found that over 90% of them are surface fires. So that's the type of fire we're dealing with primarily here in Maine. So if you only worry about the big logs and the big trees, you're still going to have a surface fire. The big trees take a lot more heat and flame to ignite than the small stuff. Just like when you think about building a campfire when you're camping, what do you start with? You start with the small twigs and leaves and needles, and then you build on. You add on the bigger logs. So that's the way fire works. Keep that in mind. I've got a little game here I want to play with you. I know we're getting a little bit over on our time, but I think this was taken in your community, and I don't want to offend anyone who might own this property, but I want to see if you can find the hidden house. Can you see the house in there?
Yes,
If
not
you
very
can't,
well.
yeah. If you can't, I did a little sketch of it. So there it is. And that's an extreme situation of a lot of brush and trees and shrubs near a house. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I don't know if this is the same way, but we did a walk around that place a few years ago. So, and I already mentioned this briefly, but our recommendations on clearing debris and brush near home do not overrule the shoreland zoning laws. Our recommendations are primarily for areas out of the shoreland zoning. So don't say I cut those trees down because the ranger told me, because I'll get in trouble. And over the last few years, I've noticed you guys have invested in house number signs, which are great. I don't think any of our other Firewise communities have been this consistent with their signs. And that would really help if a firefighter had to get to a certain place to put out a fire or to protect a home from an oncoming fire, and also for medical reasons. So I think those signs are great, and my hat's off to you guys for putting those up. And it also helps even on the brush chipping day, so I know that I'm at the right place looking off the forms. So when we have these Firewise Day events, we're supposed to talk a little bit about plans for the future. And I assume everyone here wants to continue with maintaining the current status as a Firewise USA site. So we're going to continue to brush chipping days, focusing on brush and vegetation near structures. And I'd like to get back into conducting random wildfire risk assessments. We'll talk about that for next year. Maybe I'll do 6 or 7 next year. And always looking for new venues for annual Firewise Day events where we do this type of prevention and education. I don't want to keep doing these virtual ones. This worked out good for this year as part of the being safe from the COVID-19. But I would much rather do something in person. And if there's any type of a social event or when Sprucewold opens again, if there's a way we can meet there face to face and go over some of the stuff, it's always better to do that. And then it's more of a discussion rather than me just talking at you. But I also want to encourage the fire department to continue to do their training in Sprucewold as their members retire and they hopefully get new members to replace them. They all should not be surprised when they go into Sprucewold. They should know the roads and know the type of risk that you have there. And actually, when we did the wildfire risk assessments 10 years ago, we kind of put a score on them and we tallied them up, and the overall rating was a high risk of wildfire, which is kind of rare in Maine. Most of them are in the moderate risk category, but you guys with the spruce component of the forest and the older log cabins and the narrow roads and access, you had a lot of things that put you in that high risk category. One program that I don't think you guys have participated in yet, each year the NFPA has a Community Wildfire Preparedness Day. They've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a $500 grant that's available for communities that have to fill out an application, and they want you to do some type of an event that involves clearing brush and fire prevention education. And they do it nationwide, and they try to do it the first weekend of May. And I said, that doesn't really work for Maine. There's a lot of people who are seasonal. They don't even come back till the middle of May or even closer to Memorial Day weekend. So they said, well, you guys can, as long as you have a meeting on that day, even a phone-in meeting, you can extend your work project into June. So we've had 1 or 2 communities get this award every year, and it's not a state administered grant at all. It's through NFPA, which is a kind of a regulatory agency for fire, and they get money from State Farm Insurance to do this. So in this case, this is one of our other Firewise communities in Leamington. They took a Saturday in June, and they formed a couple of different work parties, and they did some neighborhood brush cleanup for those that were not able to do their own, and some work along the roads. And then after they worked for 3 or 4 hours, they had a cookout, and the grant paid for the meals, and they gave them T-shirts, and it was a good gathering, and we got a little publicity on it. So if you guys want to think about that for next year, I'll make sure that Ralph or whoever's kind of handling that stuff knows about it. And like I said, I encourage you to do it, but I have nothing to do with where the money comes from or who gets it. So that's about all I had. I know I've gone almost an hour here, but I do thank you for your attention on this. And I think I'll turn this PowerPoint off and look at some faces and see if there's any questions.
I have a question, Ken.
All right. Can you see me? I can see you.
I can, yeah.
Good.
I live in a cabin that has a big community space behind it. It's owned by Lincoln Heights, and there are also some properties that I pass, or not properties, land that I pass on walks, like at the base of Nahanata Road, right above the park, on Sunset, where there's a lot of really dense trees and some that have fallen down, and the forest just isn't well maintained for one reason or another. And I just always feel a little bit worried about that, but you've actually put me at ease that most of the concern is about clearing areas near structures, and these aren't necessarily near structures. But I just would love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, good. I'm glad that point came across. This is a common thing that we have in our Firewise communities. Is, you know, our eyes tend to think like landscapers, like we got to get rid of that ugly looking tree, and I still see things the same way. I agree that some of those big trees that are dead and down are dangerous, but they've done studies and they measure the fuel moisture in the big logs versus the small logs, and they call the big logs 1,000-hour fuels because it takes 1,000 hours for them to dry enough that they will burn. Whereas something as small as a pencil only takes 1 hour to dry. So, or something, a 10-hour fuel would be the size of your wrist maybe, or a baseball bat. So those are things to keep in mind, and I don't want to discourage you from, you know, talking to those folks, those property owners, and trying to encourage them to clean up some of that wood debris. And I know it's expensive, but in some cases it works good just to kind of maybe get a crew together or spend a little money to drop those big trees onto the ground. We call it bucking them up, make them into 4-foot segments so they can be rolled over and put in a neat pile. Now, it's expensive to try to get rid of them, but if they're just there in a 4-foot high pile, they're going to decompose and they're really not a fire threat. They're going to retain that moisture. But the small brush, that can be used on a brush chipping day, and we can get rid of that. But the big ones, they don't necessarily have to leave because there's not really a market to sell them. You know, I think we all know that. You can't just have someone come buy these trees that have been dead for several years on the ground. So hopefully that helps you. And I appreciate the question. That's very good to bring that up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
This is Larry Anderson. This was excellent. We were very, very informative. I want to thank you for that. And I saw that it was being recorded. So I'd be anxious to share this with my children, the future owners of our cabins. So
Oh, good.
Early on aware of the serious threat to Sprucewold and our community with fire. So thank you.
Well, good. I appreciate the comments, and Microsoft, who runs this Teams program, will send me an email in probably tomorrow or Friday, and then I'll try to forward that out. And I try to edit out the chit chat and me scrambling around in the beginning, so it's just the presentation.
Thank you.
Hopefully the PowerPoint will come through. I've had some trouble with that in the past, but even so, you probably heard me trying to describe what the slide was. So if it doesn't come through, at least they know kind of what we're talking about. So that's great. I'm impressed that you want to pass that on to the next couple of generations.
I have one more question. When you talked about this 5-foot perimeter around the cabin, we're thinking of doing some landscaping right around our cabin and putting, flowers and stuff like that, not little evergreen trees or something more dense. But is that also something you discourage?
No, another good question. The succulents, the perennials and flowers and stuff like that, they're not likely to carry a fire. I guess depends. Are you going to put a lot of mulch down though? That's kind of the fine line there. Do you envision you're going to have mulch near the house?
I'll do whatever you say.
Oh, well, I mean,
Gravel hill probably.
It not good to have mulch.
not in general. No. If you don't mind the look of the little what do they call them? pea gravel, the little pebbles or
yep.
something like that.
Mhm.
You know, the other thing is if you're going to be watering them pretty consistently in the spring and summer, you can probably get away with mulch. But, you know, I work in an office building here in Augusta, and I put out 2 mulch fires just walking in from the parking lot in the 15 years I've been here, and that's from cigarettes. So if there's not the chance of cigarettes there, you probably would be okay. But it's a tough call. I know it doesn't look as good, but I use gravel around my house. I don't want any chance of it burning down if there's a fire coming through. But the flowers and small perennials, I don't get too worked up about those for carrying a fire.
Okay, thanks again.
All right. Any other questions before we call it a day? Well, thank you again for your attention and for joining us. And just out of curiosity, was everyone in Sprucewold today or someone was out of state?
I'm in California.
All right.
I'm in Virginia.
Vermont.
Okay.
Massachusetts.
All right. This is great, and I apologize for the problems with the technology, but I think we got most of it, and hopefully the recording will come out well, and I'll send that to Ralph whenever I can.
Great.
Thank you.
Kent, thank you very much for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
You
Bye.
too.